Hello, Michael Snyder here. With all this talk of nuclear war, with everything that's going on in Ukraine and the long-range missiles being sent into Russia, now Russia striking back and everything that's going on, I wanted to talk a little bit about nuclear war because it's on so many people's minds. What would happen if there was a nuclear war? What would happen if the Russians launched their missiles and we launched their missiles and what would be things be like where I live? And these kind of topics are on people's minds. So I wanted to talk about this map which has been going around social media. It's actually a very old map. It's a Cold War era government map, and I wanted to, and I don't think it's perfect, but I think it should give people at least some idea of what's going to happen when there is a nuclear conflict. And so what you see with this map, it's a map of the United States, and it shows areas that at that time they thought would be targeted. And then it shows nuclear, areas where there will be very high nuclear fallout. And in particular, the blackest areas are the highest. Then the areas that are outlined but are white are the next highest. And then with the diagonal lines are the next highest in terms of radiation levels, in terms of nuclear fallout. But I think this map does a good idea of giving us some idea of the areas that will be targeted and then will be at the most immediate threat of fallout. Now, the areas that will be targeted, and I've talked about this in my articles and my books, the areas that will be primarily targeted, at least initially, will be our nukes will be targeted. The Russians, especially if the Russians conduct a first strike, the Russians will be very interested in targeting our nuclear silos. So you see here in Montana, central Montana, the central Montana is just going to get nuked into oblivion because that is where so many of our nuclear silos are. You see down here another area where there are nuclear silos. So where there's a nuclear silos, they're just going to be nuked into oblivion. You look where there's a major Air Force base down here in Missouri area, just going to get nuked very, very strongly because that's where a lot of a major air base where bombers would take off from. You go over to Washington State, there's a submarine base along the coast there. And then wherever there's military bases, airfields, especially nuclear silos, anything having to do with our nuclear weapons program, anything having to do with our ability to strike the Russians back, that will be targeted, especially if it's a first strike by the Russians. And so areas like that, these areas in central Montana, and then you see the plume going out, and, the fallout will be carried, from west to east. And that's why you see all these plumes going from west to east on this map, because, the area that'll get hit, then the prevailing winds will take, and the nuclear fallout will be carried in the atmosphere and will be carried in an easterly direction. So you see these areas, these northern states will just be hit extremely hard by the fallout. So much of the upper Midwest will be just really covered by and hit very strongly by the fallout. And a lot of people at that time, they'll know that, okay, nukes hit somewhere else, but where I am, they'll think it's safe because they'll go outside and everything will seem fine and it'll be sunny and they won't see anything happening in their immediate area and they'll think they're safe. But the winds of the fallout will be traveling into their area, and so they'll literally be outside breathing it in. They won't even realize what's happening to them. But then once the nuclear fallout, once they've ingested it, is all over. There's nothing you can do if it's at high enough levels. But so a lot of these areas in the north and in the east, of course, will be hit as well. Now I think this map kind of understates the threat, Washington, D.C., and, that's, in terms of there's so much military command and control around Washington, D.C., of course, the White House, Congress, federal agencies. You've got, Fort Belvoir up there. That whole area, Washington, D.C., the Northern Virginia suburbs are just going to get nuked into oblivion. So this map makes it look like it's, not that serious, but that whole area just can get nuked like crazy, down around Richmond, Virginia Beach, Norfolk, and then of course New York City, and major, and New York City being the heart of our financial center, that'll be targeted out on the West Coast, Los Angeles, you got San Diego, of course Seattle, San Francisco, major population centers, major areas that have to do with our economy, with our government, with our financial system. Those will be targets too. So you see, and in general, I mean, of course, you've got where the nuclear silos are. You've got those fields will just be nuked into oblivion. The north, but in general, the east is going to do far worse than the west. Literally, the safest places. And you look down here, some places down here in Texas, look like they will fare fairly well, especially closer to the border. If you're away from Dallas and Houston and some of the others, some of the places down in Texas might fare fairly well. You've got some of the places, whether it's Alabama, Mississippi, aren't going to get touched too much. Some places, maybe Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, maybe. But in general, it's going to be better to be in the western part of the country than the eastern part of the country. And you look up here, this map shows, Oregon being a pretty good place, northern Nevada, Idaho to a very large degree. Now, Spokane will get hit up here, and then, some of the radiation may affect Coeur d'Alene and areas of that nature, but a lot of Idaho will be looking pretty good. But much of the country will be under threat. And I think, like I said, this map kind of understates a lot of the threat that we'll be facing. But this isn't the only thing to consider. I want to show you another map because it's also something very important to consider. Now, here's another map. This is a map from the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and it shows operating nuclear power reactors in the United States. And let me scroll out here. Okay, so these are nuclear power reactors which are currently operating in the United States. Now, in the event of a nuclear conflict, what's going to happen is that a lot of these nuclear power facilities are going to be damaged or inoperable, or, all of a sudden they're, like we saw in Japan with the Fukushima nuclear facility, where all of a sudden there was the tsunami, it was damaged, it didn't, and then, there was concern about meltdown and all of that. And, unfortunately, they were able to eventually try to contain that, although a lot of radiation did escape and then was eventually dumped in the water and so forth. But in this case, if we have a nuclear war, all of a sudden, our economic infrastructure, and all of our supply chain is going to stop cold, power grids go down, just utter chaos. And a lot of these nuclear facilities are going to be damaged. We're facing a situation where we could be witnessing a meltdown of a widespread meltdown of a lot of these nuclear power reactors in a full-blown nuclear exchange, where all of a sudden large areas are just devastated or wiped out, targeted. And what happens, with let me go back to the previous map for a second, because the fallout, and this is very important, is going to be the worst for, about the first 48 hours. A lot of people are going to be exposed. A lot of people are going to die from what they uh, encounter the nuclear fallout that affects them during the first 48 hours. So if there's if there's a nuclear war, you need to get inside, you need to get underground. If you have a bunker, you need to go in the bunker, whatever the case, but don't stay outside. Get inside, try to get away from from the fallout as much as you can. Because if you're outside, you're breathing it in, it's all around you, you're going to be in big trouble. Uh, but it's worse for the first 48 hours, and then after about 2 weeks, almost all of it's going to be totally gone. But when the nuclear reactors, if they can't cool themselves, if they start melting down, what's going to happen is they're going to start releasing radiation, but it's not just going to be 48 hours and then it's done. There will be a continual release as the reactors, as the rods melt down. There will be a continual release of radiation. Think of like the Chernobyl or Fukushima, but in those cases, there was still economic infrastructure. There was still emergency personnel that they could address the situation and contain things and deal with it. In a full-blown nuclear war, who's going to be there to take care of a nuclear reactor that's melting down? There may be nobody. So, if you look in the eastern half of the country, it's absolutely packed with nuclear reactors. If you look on the map on the screen, nuclear reactors just all over the place. So can you imagine all of them or many of them melting down, releasing nuclear radiation just on an ongoing basis because no one's fixing them? Meanwhile, in the western half of the country, you got a couple here in California, a few here in Arizona, and then one up here in southern Washington State. But in general, you got the very few especially up in the Northwest and up here. It's not going to be a major concern, but here in the eastern half of the country, man, if a bunch of those start going into meltdown and they're just constantly releasing nuclear radiation, then of course, once again, it's going to be blown from toward the east. It's going to all go east. So everything's going to be blowing east in terms of any nuclear reactors that melt down going east. Man, that's not going to be good. So in general, in the event of a nuclear war, I think you'd be wanting to live in the western half of the country. But once again, going back to the original map, if you're anywhere in this near the where the nuclear silos are, or then when the winds are going to take that nuclear fallout east, I mean, you really don't want to be in these areas either. So in general, kind of the northwest, western half of the country, but more like the northwest, and including parts of Nevada and Utah, Wyoming, and so forth. And then over here, you see a similar thing is the better area to be in the event of a full-blown nuclear war. So that just gives you some idea if there is a full-blown. One of the reasons why I'm sounding the alarm so loudly, literally immediately, if there's a full-blown nuclear war, studies have shown that tens of millions of Americans will die in the immediate nuclear exchange. Then beyond that, millions more will die as a result of fallout. And then, of course, all commerce basically comes to a standstill. There is no supply chains. There is no economic infrastructure. There is no more food coming to the stores. Most people that don't die from fallout and radiation will die from starvation. So ultimately, estimates of well over 90% of the population in the United States will die in a nuclear war, if not immediately, ultimately beyond that from starvation and then disease, because there won't be health care and everything else. But and the power grids will be down, people will be freezing to death. well over 90% of the population will eventually die. So if you plan to stay here, if they're in the event of and a lot of people out there, oh, nuclear war, I don't have to worry about that. It's never going to happen, or, it's not going to affect me. Believe whatever you want, but we are closer to nuclear war than we ever have been before. We've been warned about this for a long time. I've been sounding the alarm for a long time. If you're a prepper, if you want to try to survive this, well, you can take this information into account for where you want to be, and then ultimately you'll need as much food and supplies for yourself and for everyone around you for as long as you plan to stay alive, because there won't be any food in the stores. There's not going to be any people bringing deliveries from Amazon, nothing like that. You're going to be on your own. The government's not going to save you. The government, we just saw with FEMA, North Carolina and Tennessee, it's more than a month later, they still the people that were devastated by Hurricane Helene still can't get the help that they need. In nuclear war, there's not going to even be a government to help you. So you're going to have to, if you want to survive, you're going to have to take care of yourself, and you're going to have everything that you need to survive on hand. So hopefully this is helpful for you. Hopefully this is some information that you can take to heart, and hopefully hopefully this helps people realize the stakes that we're facing, because literally, in the event of a full-blown nuclear war, that's the end of our society. That's the end of America, essentially. And more than 90% of the U.S. population will die by the time it's all said and done. So I know that's not good news, but the good news is that nuclear war hasn't happened yet. And so we can still do something about it. We can say something about it. If you want to make your voice heard, now is the time, because we're closer to nuclear war than ever. And this, as you can see from what I've described, this is a really big deal. So thank you for tuning in. Please like, share, and subscribe, and comment down below. That helps us get these videos out to more people. And in terms of getting prepared, there's some links down in the description down below that will be helpful. Thank you all for tuning in, and I'll talk to you again in the next video.